And joining me now is the president and vice chair of Microsoft, Brad Smith. Brad, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, let me start. You're here. You are essentially coming to be call for regulation of artificial intelligence, of where we're going. And your relationship, let me just ask you, instead of trying to paraphrase it, what is your technical relationship with ChatGPT, OpenAI? Because I know you're a big investor. Some people almost refer to you guys as the unofficial owner of ChatGPT. Is that fair?
We're not the owner, and we have no control over OpenAI. They're a separate firm. They're owned and controlled by a nonprofit. But we are an investor, and we...
Are you the largest investor?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we use the investment not to send a check, but to build what we describe as the AI supercomputing infrastructure that is used first to train the models. So, literally something like ChatGPT was designed by engineers in California, but literally trained in a data center in Iowa, next to Des Moines.
Is this an Oppenheimer moment? Meaning, we had this amazing, incredible, powerful technology with nuclear that was ahead of where government could figure out how are we going to regulate this, and we came up. What should be the model as we tackle artificial intelligence? Is it sort of the way we tackled nuclear?
I think it's a great question, but I would really say the answer is almost the opposite. Humanity invented or tamed the atom to create a bomb that could destroy people, and later on figured that they could tame the atom to produce power as well. OpenAI is creating artificial intelligence to do good, and yet we also need to think about how it can be misused and do harm. But let's at least start with, we're doing this for a good reason. Let's protect against the abuse. We're not doing it to create a weapon in the first place.
All right. But we just released it into the public before we had guardrails. And that seems to be a bit disturbing, because the last experiment we did on the population was social media. We released it with our guardrails. And after a few years, we realized, oh, that was a mistake. Do you at all regret that ChatGPT is public right now?
No, but I would first embrace the premise, if you will.
Okay.
We need guardrails. And we need guardrails that are built by companies, and that we need guardrails that are in the law and are supervised by governments. In the case of ChatGPT, or really GPT-4, call it, the model itself, there is a deployment safety board that's managed by OpenAI and Microsoft.
Who's on that board? Who makes up that board?
It's people who are...
What are their backgrounds? Tell me their backgrounds. Are they engineers?
It is fundamentally engineers, but they are engineers with a broad perspective on life.
You have one sociologist on that board?
I don't know whether anybody is a sociologist. I could certainly find out. I'll tell you, there are some engineers who know more about sociology than a lot of sociologists I've met.
I understand that, but there is a feeling that the tech world always says, hey, we know this. You guys don't. And you're like, yeah, but you're running an experiment on the human brain.
Yeah.
You're not as knowledgeable about that as you think you are.
Well, first of all, I think it's right to always act with humility. Let's assume there's more we don't know than we do. Second, there's a point that you're making that I think is so important. More than any form of digital technology in the past, this really requires a multidisciplinary approach. You combine engineers, data scientists with sociologists, with philosophers, with people across the liberal arts, and
behavioral scientists.
Absolutely, and we have 350 employees at Microsoft working on this field of responsible AI. It does include sociologists. It includes people with the grounding in history and literature and other things, and that's got to be the future. I couldn't agree more.
So, if you were to ask Congress to act now, it's going to be tough to get this Congress to do this. What's the first regulation you think should be put on all of you right now?
Well, we're really asking for two things, and it's why I've come to Washington this week. The first is we're asking the executive branch to move forward with an executive order so that it will only purchase or procure AI services in certain categories from companies that are applying an AI risk management framework that's been adopted by the government itself, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Let's send a signal to the market.
Do they have that framework yet?
Yes, it was released in January, and actually it resulted from 18 months of work pursuant to a law that Congress passed in 2020. So that we should say is that's good news. But then second, we are going to need another law. And I think what we're going to need is a new agency that is responsible for deciding when these most powerful models will be licensed, do it pursuant to safety requirements.
Do you think we need like a commission? We have the the reason I started with Oppenheimer is we have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Is that a model?
I think we should look to those kinds of models. We have a Federal Aviation Administration. We have a Food and Drug Administration. If you buy a product in the grocery store, then go next door to the pharmacy, get in your car, and then go to the airport, every step of the way, you are getting a product that has been reviewed and to some degree is regulated by the government. It's okay for all of us from the tech sector to say, you know what, innovation flourishes, people have confidence in what they buy, there is a role for balanced regulation, and that is what we're going to need from Congress.
What responsibility do you think Microsoft has, regardless your sort of morality and ethical responsibility here? Because that's not something you can legislate.
I think we do and always will have the first responsibility to get this right. I mean, I do not for a moment think it's ever appropriate for a tech company to say, we're waiting for the government to tell us what to do, and until they do, we're not going to think about these hard questions. We need to think about them. And you know, we've been preparing for this moment for 6 years. We adopted 6 ethical principles. We have corporate policies. We have testing. We have training. We have tooling. We have an oversight mechanism. We better get it right just about every day.
You're not in the social media space. You're probably thankful of that. You probably have some social media with some of the, but not like Meta or Google or when it comes to, you know, what do you believe the government got wrong in its lack of regulation on social media?
I would say 2 things. Look, first, to some degree, we all got it wrong, and it's okay for us all to say, gee, maybe we were a little too euphoric a decade ago.
Naive?
Yeah, well, look at the Arab Spring. I bet there were people on Meet the Press saying
100%.
Social media will be the best
time.
thing for democracy in the history of democracy, and then 4 years later, it was a weapon attacking democracy itself. Yeah. So let's be 10 years older and wiser, and let's put guardrails in place under the law. But then I would just say one other thing. We're sort of in the social media space.
No, I understand.
Because we own LinkedIn.
Right.
And one of the things we've learned through LinkedIn is you need to have not just guardrails, you almost need to create a culture for your own people who are creating the technology, but you create a community and you encourage a certain level of behavior. It doesn't mean everybody does what you hope. But you really need to think broadly. It goes back to your point. You actually care a lot, or you should, about sociologists, for example.
Well, and I go back, look, this is the week that we had the Surgeon General put out a warning about social media. Okay, and there's been a lot of, look, I absolutely believe some of this stuff is an addiction for some people. I think some people know how to not be addicted to things, and some people do. And like tobacco, like cigarette smoking, there's something to it. But this gets at the heart of sort of skepticism here, which is the social media companies let us down. Why should we trust you guys on AI?
I sort of go back to the famous phrase from Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Let's all learn from the past, whether we were responsible for it or not. And frankly, it's a lot easier to learn from other people's mistakes than from your own. Right. Let's learn, let's be responsible, but let's have the government play an appropriate role to supervise, in effect, the things that we're the most worried about, and let's do it from the get-go rather than wait for things to go off the rails.
There have been a lot of your sort of tech competitors and colleagues who've also come to Washington over the last month. Everybody's trying to shape this conversation. Some of the Google engineers are a little more nervous about where things are going than, say, some of the Meta engineers who think that this is headed in a certain place. And certainly ChatGPT CEO came in here and said, hey, regulate us, do this. The Google engineers seem to be worried about that moment that the machines could take over. What is the level of concern you have on that?
I think we should be concerned if we fail to address the problem. So let's start by defining the problem. In that case, I think the problem is defined as, look, we don't want machines to start running critical infrastructure and going
They're already
awry.
deciding health outcomes. some healthcare outcomes, and that's mostly good, but when it's an insurance company using AI to decide a claim is, we're going to pay for this claim and not that claim, suddenly that feels like a machine deciding my healthcare.
And it raises two really important points. First, let's all recognize the law applies. There is no defense called, Your Honor, a machine made me do this.
Right.
People, we, the insurance
So
company,
Microsoft, in this case, if you build the AI platform that does this, you're comfortable being liable if it's misused.
I think what one needs to do when it comes to liability questions is look at where the control and the decisions are being made. In some cases, it may be the company that makes the model. In some cases, it may be the company that has the infrastructure where it's being deployed. In that case, it might be the insurance company itself.
Right.
It needs to be accountable for ensuring that humans are taking the output from a computer and using their brain. Let's not stop thinking here. That's why we have fundamentally taken every service that we're creating and calling it a co-pilot. Let's not put our brains on autopilot. Let's use this to get smarter and learn faster.
What's something that you think Congress could do in the moment, right now? Like a simple thing early?
I would love to see the Congress move forward with a piece of legislation that frankly would create a new regulatory agency and give it the authority to get to work.
So get it out of the no FTC offshoot, no CISA offshoot, do this separate, create a new agency.
Yes.
Okay.
And that can be done. I mean, here in Washington, people say, oh, no, we did that last century.
Create alphabet soups all the time.
Yeah, it can be done, and then give it the authority pursuant to legislative oversight, but and direct the agency as to the goals and the roles it should play, but let it get into the details.
All right. In the next year, how's the average two-parent household's life going to change with AI? What's something that's going to make their life just different, hopefully better?
Let me give you examples that I think have real potential the next year. Globally, there's 450 million people that have diabetes, and that can lead to eye disorders. And there's only 200,000 ophthalmologists in the world. So most people don't have the opportunity to go to an eye doctor. So, we've developed AI software with a company called Iris so that anyone can take the camera and their phone and software. And it is not as good as an ophthalmologist, but it's 97% as good in detecting this. There's 4 billion people in the world that do not have easy access to a doctor at all. Right. Or I'll say if somebody lives in a place...
They might have a phone.
Yes, they're much more likely to have access to a phone than a doctor. There are people in the world today that unfortunately at some point in the next 12 months will live in a place where there's a tornado or a hurricane or a typhoon or an earthquake. And if they do, we're using AI with the American Red Cross to identify in real time with satellite imagery where are buildings that have been damaged, how can they get people to the right place faster. This is the reason we do this. And we see it then improving the productivity of people, the productivity of the economy.
The future of Microsoft, how important is AI to it?
I think AI is important to the future of every aspect of digital technology. So I think it's of fundamental importance to the future of Microsoft.
So it's sort of like it's the equivalent of sort of like if the internet is foundational, AI is foundational now to every tech company.
I think it probably is. In fact, I'd almost go as far as to say AI will become important to every company, regardless of the fields it's in, at some level.
What's Microsoft's role in all this? Are you going to be the platform builder? The boutique, so a company like NBC News comes to you and say, hey, we want to streamline how we get all of our wire copy in from around the world or something like that. Do people hire Microsoft to build a platform like that?
No, but I think we're fundamentally doing 3 things. First, we are building the AI supercomputing data infrastructure. It's a bit of a mouthful.
The large language model.
Well, it's the technology, the hardware, the advanced supercomputing that is needed to develop the models and then deploy them so everyone can use them.
Right.
The second thing we're doing is then creating, in effect, the software platform so that any business, any individual can access the model. And third, we have our first-party services. Look, if you want to create a PowerPoint presentation next year, it's going to be a lot faster and easier because AI is going to help you do it.
Do you believe this stuff is no longer proprietary at a point?
Well, there's always some innovations that are proprietary, but there's always a lot that spread quickly.
Well, I think about the internet. The internet, in some ways, was a gift of the American government, right? The Defense Department, in some ways,
fair.
right? So it wasn't an individual who invented it per se. This is different. AI is coming from the private sector. In some ways.
It mostly is. I mean, yes, the government will say gave birth to the internet. Steve Jobs gave birth to the smartphone as we know it today. It really, and what is interesting, and it's easy to forget, I think, in the United States, that it doesn't matter where the industry you are. You're dependent on great ideas that actually come from the commitment of our Congress to fund basic research that's done in universities, that are published in papers, create great ideas, and we all stand on the shoulders of those people. That's sort of the genius of this country. The rest of the world has studied it. They're learning from it. We want to continue to invest in it here.
There's a real sense. There's some lawmakers that would love to just hit pause. Come on, let's figure out the guardrails before we go full bore into this. Everything I've learned says, well, this is out. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Is it, or is there a way to slow things down?
I fundamentally think it's extraordinarily difficult, especially in the world that we live in today, with different countries, different approaches, China, the United States, elsewhere, to slow the pace of technology. What we can do.
Some would argue that that's in your business interest to not slow the pace, for what it's worth.
I'm not going to contest that. We believe in innovation moving forward. Let's accelerate the pace of, I'll call it, responsibility. Self-responsibility, self-governance, but governance under the law by the government. That's where we should speed up.
Well, it is notable that you are the CEO that has come to town to try to accelerate this with Washington. We'll see how many people
or at least the vice chair and president.
There you go. Excuse me, the vice chair and president, CEO. Brad Smith, thanks for coming in and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.